This podcast is a production of the Three Ranger Bros Studios, in association with Zio to Hero, the podcast.
Hello everybody and welcome to Tiger Tales, the place you'll find stories and fanfictions written and read to you by your host, me, Tai Tiger. Today we're diving back into Power Rangers Universe 113 and the expansion of Future Foundation called Power Rangers Vengeful Vanguard. This story takes place in the yin side of the universe, where magical users and technology are at war with each other. In the very first chapter of this story, our version of Luca became the Quantum Ranger, and it drew up a lot of questions. So, let's dive in and find out what's been happening with CJ whilst her lover became the Quantum Ranger.
Welcome to Universe 113. Many tales are told here. Some you may recognize, like the Power Rangers Future Foundation. Some are new. This universe was separated into two parts, yin and yang. One is normal, the other hosts a war between technology and magic. Here we find more Ranger teams, a few Kamen Riders, and the introduction to a new level of Ranger power, known as the Apex Grid. Get ready for tales beyond any other as we dive into Power Rangers Universe 113.
Power Rangers Vengeful Vanguard, Chapter 2, Aiding the Enemy. Luca walked into the kitchen and found CJ making coffee. "Oh, hey, you're awake. Good, 'cause you're gonna be very late," CJ grinned, handing him a cup of coffee to go. "Thanks. Are we still on for dinner tonight?" Luca asked as he took a swig. "Yep, Karma Pizza at 9, CJ replied. "Good. I'll see you tonight, bub," Luca said. Then he gave her a quick kiss. Then he left the house and got into his car and drove off and headed for the base. He was late by almost 30 minutes, but eventually found his way to the General's office. "Ah, our first Ranger has returned," the General barked. "Sorry, sir, I slept in late," Luca muttered. "Well, you're here now. Sit down. We're making plans," the General ordered. Luca nodded and sat down. Joining the board, the General continued the meeting. CJ waited exactly 1 hour, then she got into her climbing gear, then she walked into the back garden and scanned her surroundings to make sure none of her nosy neighbours were watching. She then twisted the head of one of her garden gnomes exactly 360 degrees, then a piece of her lovely cut grass opened like a panel door. She then hopped down into a tunnel that hid underneath the garden. She then walked through the tunnel. She walked for about 2 miles before she came to a long piece of rope. She strapped herself to the rope and scaled up the wall till she climbed out of a hole, and she was now in the forest. She looked left and right and then covered the hole up with a camouflage sheet. She then ran through the forest, hoping to get to her destination quickly, hopping over large branches as she did. Making sure that no one spotted her, she then stopped and held her hands out. She took several large steps ever so slowly, and she walked through a protective invisible barrier. As she walked through it to the empty forest before her, turned into a large village bursting with life. She lowered her hands and took a deep breath. She then strolled through the village. The playing children said hello to her. She waved and said hello back. She then headed for the fire circle. There was a lot of elders sat there with some of the village members. CJ walked up to the circle and knelt down. "Ah, welcome, CJ. So glad you could join us," one of the elders said. "Thanks, sorry, I couldn't get away any sooner," CJ replied. "Everyone remember CJ, our spy in the capital?" a woman said. CJ nodded at her. It was Udana. Several years ago, she was the White Mystic Force Ranger and the mentor to the team of Mystic Force Rangers. But when the magical realm was cut off and everyone lost their homes she had also lost her powers. She grew older quicker, and with age came a bitter and snappy personality. "So tell us, what do you know about this Power Ranger that attacked our scouts yesterday?" one of the elders asked. "He states the Morphing Master made contact with him, a silver one, and gifted him the Morpher, and the soldiers have made several statements of how good he was, but there was no fight between the Rangers and our scouts, only the monster that attacked them," CJ stated. "Yes, our scouts also said there was a monster," another elder said. "We haven't had a monster here in years," one of the council members piped up. "The capital most likely planted it themselves, in the forest," Udana piped up. "I have to say, I do not think the capital sent the monster. They have routines and plans to fight those of the monster type, if or when they came back, and this fit the bill," CJ replied. "Do you defend the capital?" an elder snapped. "No, my allegiance is those of the magic people," CJ retorted. Good. CJ, you are irreplaceable. Your work is needed for us to win the war, Udana snapped. I understand, CJ nodded. The meeting carried on for a little while. They spoke about the village defences, the farm, and then other village stuff. When the meeting was over, CJ was pulled to one side by Udana. How are you, child? Udana asked. I'm good, thank you. How are you? CJ asked with a weak smile. Good. This mission of yours is pretty daunting, isn't it? I remember the day the veil appeared, blocking us from the other side of the world. I tried to reach your parents, but I got no word. The response. When we met a person from that side, they completely forgot who I was. I hoped I did a good job raising you. I was so scared when you volunteered for this mission, but looking at you now, I see a grown, independent, beautiful woman. I'm very proud of you and what you're doing, Udana told her. Thank you. I'm glad it was you. Now, I must be going, CJ grinned. Okay, my dear. You remind me of my son sometimes. Also headstrong. I'm very on point, Udana chuckled. CJ hugged Udana, then she made her way back to the capital. She headed through the forest and back down into the tunnel. She walked through the tunnel, back up into her garden. She turned the gnome's head 360 degrees the other direction, and the latch closed. Then she headed back inside the house and got dressed into more formal wear, and then she left the house and entered the main city. She walked through the streets, did some window shopping. She stopped at a wedding dress store. She stopped and thought about her mission. Her love for Luca was true, though, but her mission was also very important to her. She sighed and then walked away. She found herself sat on a bench waiting for time to fade the day away, when suddenly she saw several army trucks zoom down the road and headed to one of the capital exits. CJ bolted to her feet. Wonder if Luca will morph again. CJ muttered to herself. She then ran after the trucks. She found them all parked by one of the entrance, and one of the entrance doors was open. It was the west side, and it was swarmed with soldiers. Some knelt down, some stood firm, and some hid behind cover. She then saw a monster advancing towards them. It looked like a wrecking ball, but a mangled messed version. It was humanoid with a wrecking ball machine, and one hand was a wrecking ball that was attached by a chain. She saw Luca advance towards it. She then saw it. He barked into his morpher. Quantum power! He yelled. He then raised his hand up, and in a blinding light, he morphed into the Quantum Ranger. Wow, CJ said quietly. She slowly advanced towards the battle. She no longer was watching from afar. She managed to get within listening distance from the soldiers, who waited in case the Quantum Ranger failed or needed backup. The Quantum Ranger ran at the Wrecking Ball monster. He aimed his blast, and each shot hit the monster head on, but the monster wasn't affected. Then he shifted his blast into sword mode and slashed the monster, but the monster blocked each strike. Then the monster threw out his massive ball. It flew out the range and collided into him. Sparks flew off the Ranger as he was thrown off his feet. The ball was attached to a chain, so the monster was able to spin around the ball and slam the wrecking ball into the Ranger, again knocking him off his feet. CJ almost jumped up and to jump into the fight, but she second-guessed herself. As she was just an ordinary being, CJ watched as the wrecking ball monster grabbed the Quantum Ranger and was slammed by the wrecking ball. Again and again, CJ jumped up, ran towards the fight. One of the soldiers tried to grab her, but she sidestepped around them. She ran ahead as she watched the monster keep slamming its ball into the Ranger. Then suddenly it slowed down and froze into place. CJ stopped and noticed that the sparks coming off the Ranger's suit had also frozen into place. CJ spun around to see everything had frozen into place. She then saw a silver figure floating before her. Hello, CJ. I am the Silver Morphing Master, the being said. You gave Luca the Quantum Morpher, CJ gasped. I did, and now it's your turn, the Silver Morphing Master told her. My turn? I am not a ranger, CJ barked in response. But you are the daughter between two of them, the Master claimed. I am. My father was yellow, my mother was white. Ninja Steel Rangers, CJ stated. That is why you must step up. As I told the Quantum Ranger, this world is in peril, and you are on borrowed time, the Master said. He held out his hand, and a ninja battle morpher appeared with a white ninja star. I cannot be a ranger, CJ chuckled. Her mind flew a mile a minute, but she found herself grabbing the morpher and the ninja steel star. Take your legacy, CJ, and help out the Quantum Ranger, the Master told her. CJ looked down at the morpher. She gripped onto the ninja power star, knowing it once belonged to her mother. She then looked up and the Master was gone. The time continued on. She turned to see the monster slamming the wrecking ball into the Quantum Ranger. The soldiers behind her kept screaming for her to get out of the way. Hey! Leave him alone! CJ barked. The monster looked at the girl and threw the Quantum Ranger away. He landed on the floor and demorphed, leaving an unconscious Luca on the ground. The monster advanced onto CJ. "Pardon me, but before we dance, I'd best dress for the occasion," CJ said. Then she placed the power star into the ninja battle morpher. "Ninja, spin!" she called out, and she hit the star with her thumb and spun the star. Then in a flash of light, CJ morphed into the white Ninja Steel Ranger. The monster stood there not phased by the introduction of a second ranger. She then ran at the monster with her ninja sword in hand. She slashed the monster several times, then she jumped up and over the monster and slashed the monster's back. The monster shot out the wrecking ball and swung it around, trying to hit the ranger. The ranger saw her chance to jump up and stab the sword into the links of the chain and stabbed the sword into the ground. The monster tried to pull the chain but could not get it free. The right ranger ran up to the monster, jumped up, kneed the monster in the face. Then she jumped onto the monster's shoulders and rammed her elbow into its head several times, making it stagger. She jumped off the monster, pulled out her ninja blaster and placed the ninja power star on it, locking it in. Then she fired at the monster fell back and finally exploded. The white Ninja Steel Ranger stood there victorious. She walked over to the unconscious Luca. She knelt down and stroked his face, then she turned around to see the soldiers advancing. She hit her watch and teleported away. She teleported into the dark forest and demorphed. She stood there slightly out of breath, her ninja power star in hand. She looked at her watch and saw the time. She ran off and headed home. Several hours later, that night, she walked into Karma Pizza and found Lucas sat there at the table, looking a bit worse for wears, looking very depressed. She walked up to him and his face lit up. "Hey, how was your day?" Luca asked. "Yeah, not bad," CJ replied with a small grin. Lucas stood up and gave her a kiss, then he pulled out her chair for her to sit down. She sat down and Lucas sat opposite her, then the waiter came and took their food order. And there you have it, guys. Chapter 2. Now, of course, we have our introduction to our second ranger. And, of course, CJ is working for the Magical Kingdom. And Luca is one of the captains to the army of the capital. So how are these lovers going to deal with the fact that they're both rangers without knowing it, but also working for opposing teams? I can't wait to dive more into this story, but for now, I leave it there. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Make sure you check out the 3 Ranger Bros with Cosplay Dude 637 Power Rangers Universe 19 podcast. That's where you'll find all his Power Rangers and Kamen Rider stories. And then check out Mark the Red Cornish Ranger and his Nerds Through Comic podcast, where he adapts comic books into audio dramas, but was also uploading his stories in Power Rangers Universe 20. Make sure you check them out. They've all crossed over with stories of mine at some point or another. And of course, make sure you check out the Zero to Hero community with the Zero to Hero podcast. Make sure you check out If You Give a Dad a podcast, and make sure you check out the Tiger Nexus podcast. Make sure you check out the Author's Crown YouTube channel, where he uploads crossovers and unique stories written by himself on there. Then of course, make sure you check out the other Tiger Tales channels. That's Tiger Tales The Lost Stories, Tiger Tales Game Over, and Tiger Tales The Mysterious Origins. Each channel hosts its own unique stories and tales and original stories and have their own quotas and motifs. So make sure you check them out as well. Subscribe to this channel and I shall see you guys real soon.